As we finish our discussion on the European Union, what we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at policy making and economic issues that exist within the Union. So when we look at policy making power, the EU can create and maintain a single internal market. So that means that really over a lot of the main economic concepts that exist within the European Union countries, the European Union at the kind of that top level has the ability to be able to set a lot of policies that all countries have to follow. And one of those countries is the idea that most tariffs and other barriers to trade have been removed. So if you're trading something from England to Germany or any of the other European Union nations, you're not going to pay a tariff. It's very similar to trading in the United States, where if you are going to trade between different states within our country, you are not going to pay a tariff to move something from Florida to Georgia. So they very much take on that type of structure when it comes to trade within the European Union, and they get rid of the vast majority of tariffs and the barriers that trade that go between those two things. Most professional certifications are also good in all member states. Lawyers are not included. So if you've got, if you're an electrician and you're certified as an electrician in one country, then you are certified as an electrician, and you can move that certification from one place to the next. There's also a union of monetary and fiscal policy within the European Union. The EU has the power to set monetary policy, meaning they control how much money is in the supply. And there's two main ways in which you can do that to be able to control how much money is in the supply. One is through the buying and selling of bonds, and one is through the setting of interest rates. If you lower interest rates at the EU level, then national banks have the ability to borrow money at a cheaper rate, which means they can loan money at a cheaper rate, which means that there's more money in the supply. If you raise interest rates, it's a disincentive to borrowing, so therefore you're going to take money out of the supply by doing that. When we look at the concept of buying and selling bonds, if the government buys back bonds from people, then they're putting money in their hands, which means that you have a greater money supply. And if the government decides to sell a whole bunch of bonds and they're able to take people up on that, then they are taking money out of the supply. So those are two main ways that you can deal with monetary policy. All right. The euro is the main currency of the EU. Britain and Sweden are two exceptions to that concept, as they retain their own sovereign money system. The European Monetary Union has also gained the right to set most interest rates and have control over other fiscal policies. Another thing that exists within the European Union is the idea of the common agricultural policy. This type of policy has been less successful than others. The main goal is to modernize inefficient farms so that they can compete in the common market. Farm subsidies have been implemented in order to meet these goals, and the subsidies are very expensive and have been shifted into direct payments to farmers. We can also look at the idea of common defense. The Maastricht Treaty made foreign and defense policy one of the three pillars of the EU. The crisis management tasks are a core concept of this policy and are defined as humanitarian, rescue, and peacemaking tasks. So there's a pretty obvious distinction between those. Humanitarian, you're going through and you're trying to help people who are less well off, and you're going through and providing aid and those types of things. Rescue is when you're going in and trying to save people from issues that are going on, and peacemaking is when you're trying to make sure that two warring factions are willing to work together. The EU's goal is that in the event of a major issue, they would be able to deploy 60,000 troops within 60 days for up to a year to be able to go through and to be able to help with these issues. The EU can also do things with justice and home affairs. The 1997 Treaty of Amsterdam allowed for free movement of European citizens from non-EU nationals throughout the Union. This deals with visas, asylum, and immigration. So if you're able to go through and the EU grants these types of things, then they are able to move from country to country. On October 29, 2004, the European heads of government signed a treaty establishing a European Constitution. The Constitution was not ratified by member states, and the Treaty of Lisbon was created in order to implement some provisions of the Constitution. So they pushed this idea of having this Constitution, but because the member states were unwilling to ratify it, they did end up taking some of these provisions that existed, and they created the Treaty of Lisbon in order to be able to implement some of these concepts. Some of the important provisions are strengthening the role of the European Parliament, so it made the European Parliament stronger. This clause puts the EP on par with the European Council. They also gained rights over subsidies, border control, asylum, and integration, things that the European Union had not had at kind of that top level before. And they also have some say over the budget and how money is spent within the European Union. They also received greater involvement of national parliaments. National parliaments can oversee the EP and make sure that laws being passed at the level are only best achieved at that level. So it's kind of the idea of having division of powers, say within the United States, to where you've got certain things that the federal government does and certain things that state governments do. That's very much what they're trying to establish here, is that if you are going to pass something at that European Union level, that is the best place for it to happen. And if it's not the best place for it to happen, then you need to allow it to happen at the state level. There's a clarification of the relationship between member states and the EU. There's a withdrawal from the union concept. The idea that a state can leave the union is recognized for the first time. You also have the creation of a permanent EU president. Prior to this, the office changed every 6 months. And then you also have the idea of a Charter of Fundamental Rights that all members within the European Union have. There are still economic issues that exist within the European Union. It is constantly dealing with tension that revolves around economic liberalism and the need to protect the economic interests of each member country. So remember, economic liberalism is the idea that you let the market dictate the things that happen within the system. Okay? And that idea of protecting the economies of the member countries deals with a lot of governmental control. So you've got very conflicting concepts when you look at this idea. All right? More established EU countries favor greater control because they want to see that their economies are protected. Newer members favor more economic liberalism because they look at that as a benefit that will allow them to grow their economy. The international banking crisis of 2008 has brought an argument over sovereign debt into focus. So this idea between the tension between economic liberalism and protectionism was really brought to a head in 2008. Because you've got countries like Greece, Ireland, and Portugal who have been dealing with shrinking GNPs and rising unemployment. Issues over how much responsibility other EU countries have for helping them have become contentious. You've got certain countries that think that these really struggling countries, because they're part of the EU, that it's their responsibility to help them. And then you have other countries that really look at it as this as being a sovereign issue, and then they need to deal with it themselves rather than dragging the rest of the members of the EU down with them. So with this sovereign debt crisis gaining more attention, there has been a push for reform. In 2011, many European leaders met to discuss the possibility of restructuring the economies of Greece, Ireland, and Portugal. Part of this plan called for economic structural adjustment. That would mean at least a partial forgiveness of the debt in these countries. So obviously the countries that are owed that debt are very unhappy with that idea. Because of the intense economic ties between countries, these weak countries have the ability to destroy the stability of the euro and the European banking system, which is one of the reasons why Great Britain has very strongly tried to stay out of adopting the euro. So in order to prevent these issues with the sovereign debt crisis, countries have agreed to a target debt of 60% of their economic output. So that means that the debt level that you have is only supposed to be 60% of what your GNP is. While some are able to meet this goal, many continue to finance their spending through governmental loans. So in order to be able to keep it through, they keep the deficit going and their debt continues to go up. This largely worked until the credit market tanked in 2008. In 2012, even the strongest countries in the EU couldn't make the 60% debt target. Germany, which is one of the EU's strongest economy, has a debt-GDP ratio of 79%, where Greece, one of the EU's weakest economies, has a debt-to-GDP ratio of 153%, which is very concerning for the European Union and its economic union.